There is a paradox very few people ever talk about. After a profound spiritual awakening, whether it comes through meditation, a life crisis, or what mystics call the dark night of the soul, many people find themselves not overflowing with joy and clarity, but strangely empty, unmotivated, and detached from life itself. At first, the awakening feels like lightning tearing through the darkness, a surge of truth and liberation that makes you feel unstoppable. But gradually, day by day, that fire begins to dim. The very energy that once propelled you forward seems to vanish into silence. You no longer care about chasing goals. You no longer feel excited by achievements that once consumed your every thought. The dreams, ambitions, and endless to-do lists suddenly look like faded posters from a life that no longer fits you. Instead of being filled with passion, you feel a profound stillness. Not reckless, not apathetic, but something quieter, heavier. It feels as if the volume of life itself has been turned down and you can't figure out how to turn it back up again. And then the questions begin to whisper louder. Why do I feel so numb now that I've finally seen the truth? Shouldn't awakening ignite me rather than drain me? This is the paradox. Society paints awakening as a blissful climax, a moment after which you live in peace, clarity, and abundance forever. But for many deeply sensitive seekers, the reality looks completely different. Awakening does not always give you a new life full of meaning overnight. Often it dismantles the old one and leaves you staring at the ruins. The motivational system that once ran your life, the urge to prove yourself, to be recognized, to reach higher, collapses the moment you see through its illusion. And what replaces it? At first, nothing, just silence. Just the unsettling awareness that the very engine that once drove you is no longer there. That's why so many who awaken describe it not as a celebration, but as a strange psychological limbo. You are no longer asleep, yet not fully alive in a new way either. You've stepped outside the game, but you don't yet know how to live beyond it. No one prepares you for this. No one tells you that after awakening, you might feel completely unmotivated. The world prefers to sell you a fantasy that awakening equals constant love, clarity, and bliss forever. But the truth is more complex. The real journey begins not with endless light, but with a quiet inner death. A dismantling, a silent unraveling of everything you thought mattered. And only when you surrender to that paradox, the deeper path starts to reveal itself. When awakening arrives, it does something far more disruptive than most of us ever expect. It destroys the map we've been following our entire lives. The goals, ambitions, and structures that once gave us meaning suddenly dissolve. Careers that once defined our identity, relationships that once anchored us, dreams that once lit us up, they all begin to feel strangely irrelevant, like props from a play you no longer believe you're in. Carl Jung described this as the collapse of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society. For years, maybe decades, your ego carefully crafted a path based on that mask. You worked hard, you tried to fit in, you chased approval, success, and recognition. That path might not have been perfect, but it gave you direction. It gave you something to wake up for in the morning. Awakening, however, rips that mask away. Suddenly, the road disappears beneath your feet. This is why so many people feel lost after awakening. It's not that life has stopped, but the old coordinates no longer apply. The inner compass you once used, the desire to achieve, to climb higher, to be seen, simply stops working. Imagine being a character in a play who suddenly realizes the script is just words on a page. You walk off stage, but then what? Without the script, without the role, you have no lines left to say. The identity that powered your motivation is gone, and with it goes the drive to keep acting. Jung warned us about this. He said enlightenment doesn't come from imagining light, but from making darkness conscious. And that is precisely what this collapse feels like, a psychological death. The ego hasn't disappeared, it's confused. It no longer knows how to orient itself. It's like waking up in the middle of a journey to realize the map you were following leads nowhere. And without a new map, it feels impossible to move forward. This is the heart of the paradox. You haven't failed, you've simply outgrown the fuel that once sustained you. The ambitions that belong to your old identity can no longer give meaning to the self that has glimpsed a deeper truth. But here's the challenge. While you wait for a new compass to emerge, you sit in that uncomfortable in-between. The ego whispers, "You're lost, you're lazy, you're wasting your life." But in truth, you're standing at the threshold of transformation. The collapse of the old map is not a mistake. It's the clearing of space, a necessary dismantling of illusions so that a new orientation can be born. One that doesn't come from fear or approval, but from the deeper self waiting to guide you. After the collapse of the old map, you enter a space that feels unsettling, even unbearable at times, the sacred pause. This is the phase no one warns you about. Modern culture glorifies constant productivity, endless hustle, and perpetual progress. To stop, to become still, is quickly labeled as laziness or failure. Yet Carl Jung suggested the opposite, that this very pause, this in-between state, is essential for genuine transformation. The sacred pause is not depression in the clinical sense. It's not apathy or weakness. It's a deeper kind of silence, the kind that arrives when the ego has lost its bearings, but the self has not yet revealed its direction. It's a liminal space, like standing in the threshold between two worlds. You've stepped out of one identity, but you haven't yet stepped fully into another. It is uncomfortable, but it is also holy. Think of it like winter. The trees look dead, the earth appears barren, but beneath the surface, the roots are alive, the soil is preparing, the seeds are gestating. The sacred pause is that winter of the soul. From the outside, nothing seems to be happening. Inside, everything is being rearranged. Your old motivation system has collapsed, but your deeper energy is quietly recalibrating. This phase feels like suspension. You might wake up in the morning with no clear desire to do anything. Projects that once thrilled you now seem irrelevant. The 5-year plan you proudly displayed has become meaningless. And so you sit in silence, wondering if something is wrong with you. Jung would say, nothing is wrong. This is the work. The sacred pause is sacred because it strips you bare. It forces you to face the inner void, to sit with the emptiness you've spent years avoiding through busyness and ambition. And in that stillness, something ancient begins to rise, the unconscious, the hidden parts of yourself that could never emerge while you were distracted by the constant chase. Modern spirituality often skips this stage. It tells you to stay high vibe, to follow your joy, to keep manifesting. But Jung would remind us that without integration of shadow, there can be no wholeness. The sacred pause is where shadow integration begins. It is the container in which the unconscious surfaces, where buried emotions, forgotten dreams, and repressed truths finally have space to breathe. So if you find yourself in this limbo, unmotivated, restless, uncertain, understand this: you are not broken, you are in transition. The sacred pause is not the end of your journey, it is the initiation. The silence is not punishment, it is preparation. And if you can learn to honor this pause instead of resisting it, you will discover that the void is not empty at all. It is full of the raw material from which your new life will be born. If the sacred pause is the winter of the soul, then the goo phase is the alchemy happening inside the cocoon. It is one of the most disorienting and misunderstood parts of spiritual awakening. Imagine the caterpillar. For a time, it crawls through life with purpose, eating, moving, surviving. Then one day, it spins a cocoon, and what happens inside is almost unthinkable. It doesn't simply grow wings overnight. It dissolves. The body of the caterpillar literally breaks down into a formless soup. In that messy, in-between state, it is not a caterpillar anymore, But it is not yet a butterfly yet either. It is goo. That is exactly what happens to the psyche after awakening. The structures that once gave shape to your identity collapse. The ambitions that used to define you lose their meaning. The roles you once played no longer fit. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet who you are becoming. Instead, you are suspended in a strange, formless space where everything feels like it's falling apart. This is why many people panic during this stage. The ego screams for action. Do something, fix this, get back to normal. But the self whispers something softer. Dissolve, let go, trust the process. And that's terrifying because dissolution feels like death. In many ways, it is a death. The death of the old self, the death of the mask, the death of the ego's control. But as every myth and ancient teaching reminds us, death is always the doorway to rebirth. The goo phase doesn't look glamorous. It doesn't get thousands of likes on social media. It's not sitting on a mountaintop in bliss or posting profound quotes about enlightenment. It looks like lying awake at night, unable to explain what's happening to you. It looks like sitting in silence while the rest of the world rushes by. It looks like letting go of everything you thought you were without yet knowing what comes next. And yet, this phase is sacred. Jung understood this when he spoke of enantiodromia, the swinging of opposites. When the ego-driven striving collapses, the pendulum swings into soul-level stillness. From "I must do everything" to "Why do anything at all?" This flip is not failure. It is balance being restored. The goo is not wasted time. It is transformation in progress. The ego fears dissolution because it wants structure, clarity, and direction. But the self knows that only by dissolving can you be remade. Only by surrendering the old form can the new form emerge. Just as the caterpillar cannot imagine the butterfly it will become, you cannot yet imagine the self you are growing into. So if you find yourself in this goo-like state, undefined, unmotivated, uncertain, know this: it is not the end. It is the holy middle, the stage where your old identity has melted away and your new being is being woven together cell by cell, truth by truth, from the inside out. As you move through the sacred pause and the goo phase, a subtle but dangerous temptation often appears: the temptation to bypass. Spiritual bypassing is when you use spiritual ideas to avoid dealing with the raw, messy, uncomfortable parts of being human. It's when awakening is mistaken for escape rather than transformation. This can take many forms. Maybe you convince yourself that nothing matters because the world is just an illusion. Maybe you numb out by endlessly consuming spiritual content, reading book after book, repeating mantra after mantra, but never actually confronting the pain rising inside you. Maybe you adopt the language of detachment, saying you're above it all or just flowing with the universe, while deep down you're quietly avoiding the grief, anger, and fear you don't want to face. Carl Jung warned against this. He reminded us that true enlightenment is not about floating above life, but about integrating its shadow. He famously said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Bypassing skips the darkness. It skips the messy work of facing what hurts. And in doing so, it also skips the gold that lies hidden within that darkness. The danger of bypassing is that it can leave you stuck. On the surface, you may look spiritual, meditating, journaling, quoting profound teachers, but inside, nothing has really changed. You remain in limbo, disconnected from the world, disengaged from your own growth. Instead of transformation, you've built a spiritual mask, and that mask is just another version of the ego. The truth is that the self does not want escape. The self does not want you to withdraw into numbness or retreat into denial. The self wants to live through you, to bring truth and presence into this human experience. That means embracing the full spectrum of being alive, The light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, the clarity and the confusion. To bypass is to reject half of your humanity. To integrate is to become whole. Bypassing feels easier in the short term. It soothes the ego, gives it a sense of control, lets it pretend the hard work is already done. But real awakening is not about comfort. It's about honesty. And honesty means sitting with what is real, even when it hurts. It means allowing the grief to surface, letting the anger be felt, listening to the fear instead of silencing it. Only then can those energies be transformed. So if you catch yourself drifting into bypass, telling yourself it's all illusion, nothing matters, or I don't need to feel this, pause. Ask yourself, what am I avoiding? What shadow is asking to be seen? Because true awakening isn't about escaping the world. It's about meeting it more fully with all of your being and letting the self redefine how you live within it. If the old motivation system collapses with the ego, what takes its place? At first, nothing. But slowly, quietly, something new begins to stir. It's not the fiery ambition of the past, not the restless striving to prove yourself or earn approval. Instead, it's what we might call soul-powered motivation, a movement that rises not from fear or insecurity, but from alignment with your deeper self. This motivation feels different. It doesn't demand. It doesn't shout. It doesn't pressure you to get back on track. Instead, it whispers. It tugs at your heart with subtle nudges, quiet curiosities, and gentle pulls toward what feels true. Unlike the ego's motivation, which thrives on comparison, achievement, and performance, this new energy flows from authenticity. It doesn't ask, what will others think of me? But instead, what resonates with who I really am? Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole. As the self integrates the shadow and transcends the persona, it begins to guide your life from within. The old fuel, adrenaline, validation, external rewards, no longer works. In its place arises a sustainable energy born from alignment with your essence. This is not about chasing, it's about remembering, not about striving, but about responding. You may notice it in small ways. You feel drawn to create, not for recognition, but because it feels honest. You choose to rest, not out of laziness, but out of reverence for your body. You say no to what no longer resonates, even if it looks good on paper. You stop forcing yourself into checklists and start following your curiosity. And while to the outside world it may look less impressive, inside it feels more alive. This soul-powered motivation doesn't always look productive in the traditional sense. There may still be days of fatigue, waves of confusion, moments of grief. But the difference is this: you're no longer dragging yourself through a life that doesn't fit. You're moving from a place of truth. And when action arises from that place, it has a different quality. It's not scattered or anxious. It's focused, grounded, and deeply nourishing. The irony is that soul-powered motivation often accomplishes more than ego-driven striving ever could. Why? Because it's sustainable. It doesn't burn you out. It doesn't betray your inner compass. It comes from wholeness, not fragmentation. And that kind of energy naturally creates, heals, teaches, and serves, not because it should, but because your whole being says yes. This is the new fuel. It is quieter, but stronger. It is slower, but deeper. It is not about proving yourself to the world, but about expressing the truth of your soul through the life you live. So here you are. You've walked through the silence, endured the sacred pause, dissolved into the goo phase, faced the trap of bypassing, and discovered the first sparks of soul-powered motivation. Now comes the realization that what felt like an ending was never the end at all. It was the beginning. Spiritual awakening doesn't give you back your old motivation. It doesn't return you to the same life, only shinier. It burns down the old fuel so that you can find a deeper flame, one that no external storm can extinguish. This new beginning is quieter, more ordinary than you might expect, yet infinitely more profound. It is no longer about survival or performance. It is about meaning. Carl Jung called this stage the symbolic life, living in tune with your inner imagery, dreams, synchronicities, and intuition. Instead of forcing life into rigid plans, you begin to ask different questions. Not, what should I do, but what is quietly calling me? Not, how can I prove myself, but what feels honest right now? This is how the self begins to lead, not through commands, but through resonance. Living from the self doesn't mean you'll never feel tired, confused, or human again. But it does mean you'll stop betraying yourself. You'll stop dragging your soul through a life that doesn't fit. You'll find yourself creating even when no one's watching, saying no to things that look good but feel wrong, and saying yes to paths that might look uncertain but ring true in your heart. That is the freedom awakening is pointing to. That is the new beginning. And maybe the most beautiful part is this: it doesn't require grand gestures. Often, it shows up in simple, ordinary choices, choosing peace over performance, curiosity over checklists, authenticity over approval. These small acts, repeated day after day, become the architecture of your becoming. So if you're in the fog right now, feeling like your spark is gone, remember this: it's not gone. The old fire has burned down so that the deeper flame can emerge. You're not at the end of your awakening. You're at the threshold of your becoming. If this message resonates with you, I invite you to share your journey in the comments below. What has your sacred pause or goo phase felt like? What truths have you uncovered in the silence? And if you want to keep exploring these deeper layers of psychology, spirituality, and self-awareness, ways of making the invisible visible in real life, make sure you subscribe and join this community. Because the awakening isn't the final chapter, it's the prologue to the real story, the story of who you are becoming.